Robert Mugabe is trying to quell a revolt among senior members of his party. They're backing a new law that would stop him running again as president. He is now reportedly hunting down the rebels.
He has his party's official backing to run again, but some in ZANU-PF want Robert Mugabe rather to step aside. And now that revolt has boiled over publicly. Officials from ZANU-PF and its main opposition have been working on a new constitution. That's a precondition for election. And their first draft contains an explosive clause. No one who has been in power for 10 years can run. Mugabe has already had 32 years at the top. He summoned the party officials to explain themselves and to find out who's been backing this clause.
We're entitled to have a proper constitution, not a regime change, piece of nonsense, disguised as a constitution, not an anti-Mugabe document.
Mugabe is also upset that the proposed constitution would strip the presidency of much of its powers and that it would grant rights to gay people. His party officially says it will sign nothing that stops Mugabe from running, and it's threatening to pull out of the constitutional process.
Well, that's not all for Zimbabwe. South African authorities are being taken to court over alleged torture in Zimbabwe. A human rights group wants South Africa to investigate the allegations and arrest the perpetrators should they cross the border. The Southern African Litigation Centre is now taking South Africa's police and prosecutors to court.
One of the most damning images ever to emerge of Zimbabwe's security forces dealing with Robert Mugabe's opponents. Morgan Tsvangirai had been arrested on his way to a prayer meeting, then beaten with iron bars. At the time, Mugabe said Tsvangirai deserved the beating for disobeying police. Nearly 5 years on, the two of them are partners in government. But a human rights group in South Africa is still seeking justice for Tsvangirai and for other victims of alleged torture. The Southern African Litigation Centre wants Zimbabwe's neighbor to investigate allegations of torture. It says the country has a duty to do so, as it is a signatory to the Rome Statute. So far, South African police and prosecutors have refused. But the SALC believes that's for political reasons. And it has taken the matter to the High Court in Pretoria. The case will be heard in late March. South Africa is already struggling to mediate the reform process in Zimbabwe, and Mugabe has criticized its role. A court order that South Africa must now pursue his allies could make mediation even more fraught. Robert Shibambu, E-News, Johannesburg.
Okay, well, let's get you more on this particular story. We're joined live in our Johannesburg studios by Nicole Fritz. She is the Executive Director of the Southern African Litigation Centre. Nicole, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. First of all, what has motivated your organisation to take on this case?
So this case is a long genesis. So we submitted a detailed dossier in 2008, just before the elections, in the hope that investigations and prosecutions by South African authorities might stop the political violence in Zimbabwe. Obviously, that was not the case. And after having submitted this detailed dossier, which contained evidence of torture, medical reports corroborating that, and after a significant exchange with the prosecuting authorities, a year later we received a reply without any reasons, essentially saying that they would not be investigating and prosecuting with a view to prosecuting those who travel into South Africa. And we then launched legal action, and that case now comes to fruition. It will be heard in the Pretoria High Court at the end of March.
Now, how confident are you that your case will be successful?
Well, we're pretty confident. We think we have a good case. We were provided with no reasons by the prosecuting authority as to why, and by the police services as to why they wouldn't pursue an investigation or a prosecution. Subsequent exchange of papers suggests that there is a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of South Africa's international law obligations and its own obligations, because they don't just stem from South Africa having signed the International Criminal Court. South Africa actually enacted its own legislation, the implementation of the Rome Statute Act. And the provisions in that act require that South African authorities investigate and prosecute those who are responsible for these types of crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, if they are present on South Africa's territory after the commission of those crimes.
Now, certainly a test of South Africa's commitment to those statutes. But what capacity does the country have to actually dispense international justice?
Well, the fact is, South Africa has, been leading and has led right from the very start this commitment to international justice. And it has, in terms of enacting this implementing legislation, it's set up and appointed special directorates within the prosecuting services, for instance, the Priority Crimes Litigation Unit, to specifically provide the resources that were necessary for the investigation and prosecution of these types of crimes. And it's in South Africa's interest, obviously, that it not be a safe haven for criminals of the worst order from around the globe. So, South Africa has an interest not only in being a responsible member of the international community, but in its own interest. We don't want, people pitching up from, Rwanda or the Balkans or Zimbabwe having committed, torture that amounts to crime against humanity or genocide. That's in no one's interest.
Indeed. Well, this does go to court at the end of March, so of course we will be keeping a close eye on that. But thank you very much for your input on this particular story. Nicole Fritz speaking to us live in our Johannesburg studios. She is, of course, from the Southern African Litigation Centre.